Three characteristics that are so critical and so important to address in relation to alcoholism and intervention and recovery. Stigma, shame, and anger. Stigma. In fact, they're probably Siamese triplets, if there's such a thing. They're united at the soul, those three things. The stigma that society has about people with this disease is absolutely off the mark. It's just off the mark. It's based on ignorance. The stigma is you're a bad person, you're a defective individual. Stigma is the very thing that keeps people from addressing this. Stigma feeds into denial. Stigma about this being a moral issue as opposed to a genuine disease, an absolute disease process. I remember saying that to my son when he was like 16, 17 years of age, because I tried to convey to him the importance of genetics. I used to say to him, this is a disease. And he'd look at me like, disease? What do you mean disease? What disease? Well, one day I was looking at the definition in a Dorland's Medical Dictionary of the word disease, just disease. There are many people that are recovered alcoholics that have trouble accepting the fact that this is a disease. So I remember looking at the dictionary, and it said something like this. I'll paraphrase it. It's a free translation. Any diversion or anything pulling away from the normal functioning of any organ system of the human body, characterized by any variation in the normal functioning of any organ system or combination thereof in the human body, characterized by certain signs and symptoms, running a particular course, and its etiology or its cause is known or unknown. That would be defined as disease. Just a medical definition of disease. Now I looked at the characteristics of alcoholism and addiction, and I said, look at this. There's a variation in a normal functioning. What's the target organ of an addiction? The brain. So there's a variation in the normal functioning of the brain. Certainly the part that we now know, the part of the brain that deals with pleasure and relief. Okay, the brain doesn't function as well as other people's in that respect. Alcoholism has certain characteristic signs and symptoms that are attached to it. Its cause is still debated. I lean more towards the genetic factor fertilized by the environment. In other words, I look at the wiring. You got the wiring, you're in trouble. If you come from a family system that's, using the want of a better term, I hate the term, dysfunctional. Who isn't a dysfunctional family? But a family system that's rigid, that's defensive, that doesn't communicate well, that's based on oppressive rules, so it's not safe to grow up in that kind of a system. So you don't feel okay, safe in your own family, and you're growing up in that, coupled with the fact that there's a biological history of people with alcoholism and addiction, you're an alcoholic or an addict waiting to happen. My opinion, you don't have a shot. So that I believe is the truth. And my belief in that and my understanding of that now, especially over the years, and I try to convey that to families, helps take the stigma away from this. Stigma invokes blame. This is a no-fault illness. A little tricky thing to walk is responsibility versus accountability. I'm not responsible for having this illness. My grandfathers, both grandfathers were alcoholics. One was a compulsive gambler. So there was another addictive thing going on. So there was addictive disorders all throughout the family system. I'm not responsible for developing this wiring, which might be a malfunction in one of the receptor sites, in the limbic region of my brain. 32-cent words. Okay, I'm not wired right. I'm now introduced to a chemical. Next thing you know, I love the way this makes me feel. The family system I came from, and maybe many family systems at that time, were not necessarily geared towards open, democratic, interactional negotiation. It was not You did as you told or you got your head knocked off in my family. I remember my dad used to look at me at times. You know, my father was a massive guy. He'd be sitting there looking at me over the table and he'd say, "So what's the matter with you?" By the way, that's a shaming question. That's a question tied right into shame. What's the matter with you? There must be something the matter with me. If I make a mistake, 6 plus 8 is 9. What's the matter with you? What are you, stupid? So my dad would look at me over the table and say something like this. What's the matter with you? What's that look on your face? What are you, you don't approve of this? What are you, unhappy? I'll give you something to be unhappy about. So what's the message? The message there, and I'm not knocking my dad, but the message is the environment I'm raised in is it's not safe to be genuine. It's not safe to be real. It's not safe to be okay with what I'm feeling. It's not okay to do that. So there's no negotiation of needs. You know?
Shame your name.
All right. Shame. What is shame? Well, initially it's something that everybody needs. It's a part of our civic, it's a part of our development to live in a civilized society. Shame. It's a feeling of embarrassment. And it comes, in fact, it happens before even words take place. It's what they call an affect. It's a visceral response to some kind of a connection with something that we feel embarrassed about. You're 4 years old, you walk out of the house, out of the bedroom with no clothes on, and mom and dad are having a big party. And they all jump up and yell at mom and dad, "Yeah, what are you doing? Get up there!" And your face turns red because the first place shame shows up is in the face. Your face turns red, your lip like this. That's a feeling of shame. It's beginning to teach us boundaries. Okay, that's fine. However, if we're exposed to rage, criticism, contempt, abandonment, a whole variety of environmental triggers, that feeling of embarrassment becomes a characteristic belief about oneself growing up, of being fundamentally flawed, less than, not enough, fundamentally inadequate. I have found, in my experience over 39 years of recovery, is that many, many people who develop addictive disorders have this fundamental missing link. I think it's toxic shame. It becomes toxic to us. It's this belief about oneself of not measuring up, not lovable. My opinion, toxic shame, you know, the evolved sense of shame, but toxic shame is anti-spiritual. What does that mean? Well, spirituality is basically I'm lovable. I'm a lovable human being. I have value. I mean something to my fellow man and maybe to a creator. I'd like to believe that. I can't prove that. But I mean something. I'm loved. I'm valued. Toxic shame has a way of making one feel devalued, less than. The last thing I'll say on it is this, and I know I'm going to lead into that. I want to just make this comment. In terms of treatment and recovery and intervention, guilt brings people into treatment. It does. Shame keeps it out. Shame keeps people out. They keep away from it. So it's important to know the truth. It's not your fault. Now, if I'm feeling those feelings, or let me rephrase that. If I have a belief system about myself of being inadequate, less than, not measuring up, one of the ways I'm going to defend against that is by putting on this air or this front of the opposite. That I'm either grandiose, better than, or if you get too close to me, if you get too close to my core, I'm going to keep you away from me. And one of the ways I'm going to keep you away, a great tool for me to disconnect from you so you don't get too close to know what I really believe about me, is anger. People don't like to get close with and attached to angry people. So if I feel inadequate, I'm not going to say to you, "Hi, I've been thinking about my life over the weekend and I really feel fundamentally inadequate and insecure and less than. And the only thing that makes me feel better is this, But what will I do to keep you away?" What's one of my defensive strategies, especially in a family system? I'm going to have angry responses. If you start zeroing in, for example, on my drinking behavior, on behavior that I think I need, if you start getting too close to my core, which is shame, which is guilt, a lot of guilt and shame, especially as an active alcoholic, I'm going to keep you away from me. One of the first things that the spouse sees in a relationship with somebody who's got an addictive disorder, as the disease progresses, is if they come close to complaining about it, which is one of the signs and symptoms, right? Complaining about one's drinking. Has anyone ever complained about your drinking? As soon as somebody complains, what's our usual defense? Anger. Okay? For some people, anger becomes a part of the personality. It actually becomes a part of the personality, so that you can look at someone and say, you know, that guy's an angry guy. He's just an angry guy. It's there. It's just, I call it constipated rage, just looking for a place to shoot out. You know?